What's up, everyone? Welcome back to the FCL podcast. We have a great discussion on tap today. We're fired up to welcome FCL athlete and Princeton sophomore attackman, Nate Kabiri. I'm joined by my co-hosts, Stephen Rehfuss and Matt Dunn. Matt, I'm going to pass it off to you to introduce today's segments.
Thank you, Deemer. Good morning, guys. Today, we're going to kick it off with Stephen Rehfuss running us through the 2-minute drill. Then we will get to our players' perspective, as Deemer mentioned, with special guest Nate Kabiri of Princeton. After that, we will get to our GPUs, which are our games, players, and units from this past weekend that we will highlight. Next, we will get to the breakdown, where we'll discuss passing accuracy and how players can take accountability for setting their teammates up for success beyond just delivering them the ball. And lastly, we'll get to looking ahead with Stephen Rehfuss, covering some games that we are looking at this upcoming weekend. With that being said, Stephen, why don't you run us through the 2-minute drill?
Thanks, Matt. Big weekend of college lacrosse again. Feel like we say this every week. In the Big Ten, Penn State took down Hopkins 10-4. Maryland with a big win at Ohio State 13-8 that stopped Ohio State's win streak. And then Michigan with a big win against Rutgers 8-6, bit of a low-scoring affair there. Low scoring was kind of a theme of this weekend. Denver in the Big East beating Georgetown 7-3. Then making our way over to the ACC, another low-scoring affair was UNC 8, Duke 7. And then Notre Dame beat Virginia 12-7 as well. ACC versus Ivy League matchup, we had Cornell versus Syracuse on Long Island. Cornell walked away with that one with a 17-12 win. And then lastly, Army-Navy. This one's always a great game. Army edged out Navy 12-11 in overtime. That was quite the game, and I believe we'll talk about that one a little bit later. On the women's side, a lot of upsets this weekend. Army beat Navy 17-12. Virginia Tech with a big win over Syracuse 14-11. Yale with a nail-biter against Penn, beat them 10-9. Pitt with probably their biggest win in program history, a 13-12 win over Notre Dame. Cornell made some noise in the Ivy League with a 13-12 win over Harvard. BC continued to be dominant with a 24-11 win over Virginia. And then Michigan with a huge win on Sunday, 13-12 over Hopkins. Notable performances, going to keep this short this week again. Denver goalie Malcolm Kleben, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, 79% against Georgetown. Like I said earlier, only held Georgetown to only 3 goals, which is very impressive. Matt Trainer from Penn State, he really stood out. He's having a really good year, especially when he's healthy. 7 goals and 1 assist against Hopkins. Have to shout out both CJ Kirst and Ryan Goldstein, Cornell attackmen. 8 points each for Syracuse. They dominated. And then the BC women's starting attack trio of Clark, Lapinto, and Davis, they each finished their senior day game against Virginia with 9 points. So 9 points for all 3 of them. And that contributed to 24 goals against Virginia. So big weekend for, both men's and women's. Some upsets in the women's that we really haven't seen. And a lot of good games in the men's. I think, as we've continued to talk each week, it just feels like, who are the top teams, who's not. Cornell continues to impress and has probably solidified themselves with that, definitely the number 1 ranking. But Maryland also with a huge win over Ohio State. So big weekend overall.
I was definitely surprised just by the score of the Maryland-Ohio State game. I just thought it would be a little closer there, but obviously 2 teams that looking like they're going to rematch soon. And, Michigan continues to power through the Big Ten. So, another good win for them. And you made it. I mean, I'm going to talk about the women's in the GPUs, but definitely some score results that we're not used to seeing when you pull up InsideLacrosse.com.
Yeah, 2 things stick out to me. One is the consistency of relatively low scoring games this year on the men's side. Obviously, a few, Cornell putting up 17. But I got a question for you two, as you guys understanding and following the women's game much more closely than I do. What is the most goals you've seen in Division I women's game? 24 for BC is a lot of goals. You don't see, 20 plus that frequently on the men's side. So curious if you guys have seen a game higher than 24 goals.
I don't know that I've seen a game higher than 24. I mean, I feel like Northwestern's a team that has probably put up mid to high 20s before a few times against maybe some of their, lower opponents. But I think we're definitely used to seeing high teens consistently. I think Loyola beat Navy 20-19 earlier this season. So that was one of the more recent memorable ones that had two handle to it.
Yeah. I mean, you don't see it a lot. I think BC, they get up there a lot. I think they have a couple games, maybe one or two where they hit 21, 20, but 24, I mean, it's a lot of goals.
Yeah, that's not a number I see too much. So just curious, you guys have seen it a few other times. Well, hey, we'll get back to the GPUs in a little bit here, but next up we have our player's perspective with Nate Kabiri of Princeton. If we want to welcome Nate, and Deemer, you can intro.
Nate, excited to have you. Guys, we're really excited to have Nate on the podcast. He's been a guy that we've gotten to know over the years. We've seen him, at some trainings and events, and, I've just gotten to know him as a great guy on and off the field. And he worked FCL camp last summer, which was awesome. I know the kids were fired up about that, but Nate, excited to have you.
Yeah. Thank you guys for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Yeah. So, Nate, it's been fun watching you. You're a sophomore now. You play X attack, but you also play, all over the field, and you do a lot of things really well. But I want to take this back a little bit. One of the first times I remember getting to work with you, you were actually, recently making the switch from midfield to attack. And, would love for you to reflect on that a little bit and talk about how, that was a part of your development as a lacrosse player.
Definitely playing midi growing up helped me just overall lacrosse IQ, being able to play both sides of the ball, but also just understanding really how to really invert properly. And then just playing kind of all over the field has kind of really helped me just be more versatile as an attackman as well.
I think it really shows. And it's probably something that's benefited you coming in, starting as a freshman at Princeton, where it really seems like Coach Mitchell runs a very, very free-flowing offense. You're in a lot of different spots, dodging. So, you definitely look comfortable out there, even from an early point on your freshman year.
Yeah, it's been a really good fit for me so far. Coach Mitchell, like you were saying, plays such a free-flowing, gives us a lot of leeway, sometimes too much at times, but he definitely runs a great offense, and playing with guys like Coulter and Colin at attack has been great so far. And I feel like my lacrosse IQ has just continued to develop with Coach Mitchell as a coach.
Yeah, Nate, I'm curious. The transition from high school to college is hard for a lot of guys. And there's a reason you don't see a lot of freshmen play a lot, let alone be a big impact player. Did you feel a lot of those challenges, or was it just a pretty seamless transition for you? Because from the outsider's perspective, we're watching it, and it seemed like you had a great freshman year, seemed comfortable off the bat. So I'm curious about your journey and how that felt internally, and how much maybe other guys on the team or the coaching staff helped to get you comfortable in the field your freshman year.
Yeah, the game definitely feels a lot faster in college. Just feels like it's sped up. Like you really don't have as much time to make decisions, and that window is a lot smaller. So I've had to, kind of improvise a little bit and learn to play in an offense that, isn't very, it's not as strict flowing. It's more like kind of go out there and be free and kind of play alongside these principles almost, rather than these plays. And it's been great for me. And there's guys like Coulter and Bear Auction last year that helped us kind of join college lacrosse and become, better players within the offense.
Yeah, Nate, just going back a little bit, I remember hearing your name through the grapevine a little bit just as you were coming up through the recruiting process. But then I remember seeing a clip of you. I think it's the first clip I ever saw, you going between your legs and behind the back on a dodge, before you're dodging down the alley. I think at that point you were committed to Princeton, from Georgetown prep. Doesn't exactly scream a typical Princeton player back at that time. I think you guys play a pretty creative style now. But could you talk to us a little bit about what it was like for you, growing up? Someone doesn't just pull that out of their back pocket unless it's something that they've been practicing all the time. And when I watch you play now, and even just your tackling, even Coulter as well, but for you specifically, you do play with a little bit of finesse, a little bit different style. Could you talk about where that comes from?
I think definitely growing up, I've realized that, you know, the game is really meant to have fun. And growing up, I'd be watching all these guys on college lacrosse, even you, Stephen, and just watching, you know, all the goals I'm seeing in different plays and just trying to go out in the backyard and reenact those plays. And I think just the creativeness that I've tried to bring to the game has just come from practice and just really going out there to try to have fun almost. And a lot of that starts with just a lot of wall ball that I've been doing a lot. In high school, I would kind of go hit the wall every night for a few hours, and it was kind of almost like a peaceful time for me as well, more than just anything. But I think, yeah, here at Princeton so far, like Coach Mitchell has been giving us a ton of leeway to, you know, play how we want to play and play creatively. An example of that is like understanding that, you know, you don't have to shoot every shot overhand, like how some coaches say, like an underhand shot or a low to low shot is sometimes super deceptive. And it actually just being creative and playing how you are is naturally deceptive. And it's actually some of the best ways to play.
Yeah, it's a great point, and it's something, you know, we've been talking about recently too, especially like that, like the low to low or the high to high. You know, you don't always have to change planes. And I also think, you know, when I even think about like your dodging style too, you know, you don't always have to make the same move. You don't always have to take a couple steps and change direction. You know, you're using change of speeds, you're using different creative movements. But sometimes, like as a younger player, you know, when you can be exposed to so many different coaches, you know, and sometimes not everyone is that, you know, freewheeling or allowing younger players to do that. So, you know, one, I would say two questions, like, is there, you know, a coach or two along the way that you can think of that, you know, really supported some of that growth and experimentation that you played for? And then two, whenever you got some of those critiques around, hey, don't do this or you shouldn't do that, how did you balance continuing to try to push in that style with also playing within the boundaries that, you know, maybe existed on any given team you were on?
My high school career, I had a ton of really good coaches, and they kind of let me play as creative as I wanted to. Some of those coaches were Coach Rienzo and Coach Horning for DC Dogs, and then obviously Coach Urick with Georgetown Prep. And I felt like instead of trying to confine me to, you know, a certain play style or a certain type of offense, they kind of let all of our players kind of express themselves and really just play as an offense together, but also just creatively. And I think I definitely have received some feedback in the past, like shoot overhand more or, you know, behind the back in a bad situation. And I think those coaches are definitely still right in their own way, where they may help me like tone back some of my creativity to actually just trying to get the job done. But I do think that at those points I would, you know, still go back into the backyard and practice all those crazy tricks and just try to go out there and have fun. Especially seeing guys in college lacrosse still doing it all the time. And I think a lot of that creative stuff can really help you actually like score goals. Like it's not just for flair or for trying to have fun. It can actually help in a lot of ways. And I think the behind the back is obviously a really good example of that too. But yeah, overall I had a ton of really good coaches in high school. So I'm glad to have them, and they helped me continue to grow my game.
Absolutely. And Nate, like I'm just thinking about, I watch you play and guys like you, and I'm like, yeah, it makes it challenging to cover guys, right? If I'm thinking as a defender, defensive coach, when I see Nate Kabiri, you know, roll back, keeping his right hand, drop his hand, shoot low to high, but then he splits to his left up top and shoots left hand off hip and then go behind the back. And I think to your point, like those things, if you do them at the wrong times, they can be negative, but at the right time, they're great tools. One question, you know, I hear you talk a lot about your creativity, you know, free flowing offense with Coach Mitchell. How do you go about like preparing for games, right? As a defender, defensive coach myself, we watch offenses, we scout. It can still be gray, but it's a little more black and white. Here's what we want to do. Are you a big like watch film of yourself, watch film of the other teams? Like, how do you use film as an individual or maybe even as a unit to help enhance your creative and free flowing play and your chemistry?
At Princeton here, we watch a lot of film as an offense. We'll film every practice, and we'll watch that film from the practice the next day. And I think that's really helpful to be able to learn from practice. A lot of times when you don't film practice, it's hard to get a lot of feedback. So I think firstly that was a lot of help. But when it comes to preparing for games, I'd say that as a unit, as a Princeton offensive unit, we definitely still look at the other team's defense, and we always try to expect that we're going to get the best from them. But personally, I definitely look at maybe who I think will be guarding me that game, and some things that I should just know generally going into the game. But I really don't love to overanalyze it, especially with who I'm playing against changes every single week. One thing that I do specifically before games, like that morning of, is I like to just watch some games, like watch college lacrosse from when I was younger. Like I'll throw on a Syracuse game from when I was younger, or throw on a Matt Moore highlight tape and just kind of watch. And I think that just takes me back to the love of the game and just playing there for fun. And I start like feeling like I'm in the backyard again too.
Who do you think's got the best highlight tape you've seen from, if you're going on YouTube and you're pulling one tape up, who are you going with?
I'd have to say the Pat Spencer career highlights, definitely.
Those are awesome. He's just a fun guy. Like, to your point, like, he doesn't seem like a guy also that overanalyzes. Like, he seems like a guy that lets so much come to him, and he quarterbacks, he dodges, he feeds, he's bouncy, and unpredictable, and it's, I was actually like clipping up some of his stuff a few months ago, and it's really cool to see the success he's having in hoops, just because so much of that carries over.
Yeah, definitely.
I see that a little bit with you, Nate. I think it's the change. You're a bigger guy, right? Taller guy. Change of posture and that like quick roll that you kind of got. That's like a Pat Spencer roll.
Yeah, maybe I took that from him, but he's definitely a great player, and he's been fun to watch growing up. I remember going to a game when Loyola played Hopkins at Hopkins, and he had like 3 or 4 behind the back assists or something that game, like made someone fall, and it was so fun to watch.
That's the clip where he the one where he made the guy fall, where he's like on the wing and like switches back to his left hand and just like rips it low to low.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I know that clip.
Again, when we do this podcast, we reach different audiences. We got parents that listen, we got some coaches that tune in, hopefully some of our younger players tune in. And again, like, it's been really cool to watch you grow the last couple years. And, I'll just say this, like, you're just a guy that the way you carry yourself is, someone that we look at for our younger guys, as a good role model, in the community. And, one thing I think sticks out, and I just think it's probably hard, but I would just love to hear your perspective on it, is, even more than when Matt, Stephen, and I were in high school, social media has become such a thing. Clips are coming out of every game. If you were at a game at Georgetown Prep, your senior year, there's probably 10 kids on the sideline filming, clipping up stuff. And you've been a guy too that has been the positive subject around a lot of those highlights, right? A lot of sweet goals and plays. And so, with that also, I imagine comes some pressure and ways to, learn to navigate, this landscape that you're now in. Can you talk a little bit about that, one? And two, like, is there anything that's helped you, one, stay focused, stay balanced, and just manage some of that in today's day and age?
There's definitely a lot of the attention that comes from some of those social media videos, and just obviously as a team here at Princeton having some success over the past few years. There definitely comes a little bit of pressure with that. And I know I've heard many guys that, came before me, they say that, pressure is a privilege. And I think that definitely helps too, just hearing their perspective on that. And for me, really, I think it can be easy to let the pressure get to you in some ways, especially like before a game. And that's kind of why I try to just go out there and really just have fun every single day and know that it's kind of a gift to be out here, and it won't be there every single day. And it's partly why I watch some games and highlights from when I was younger before games, just to get me back into that mental state of just having fun. But I think definitely, like pressure can definitely be a real thing. When it comes to all those clips on Instagram and stuff, I'd say they're pretty cool, definitely to have, but I wouldn't say like that all the time I'm trying to like create like crazy clips from some of my moves, but just being aware of when to, repost some of those clips, like making sure that you wouldn't repost that after like a loss, or making sure that the team comes first in all those moments. But overall, the pressure, definitely understanding that pressure is a privilege, kind of reiterating what a lot of guys have said, and just trying to go out there and have fun every day.
On this, I think you talked a little bit about, obviously when you got there, Colter McAfee has been there. When you take a look at the Princeton attack and the Princeton team, he's been a mainstay there for a long time. And now having the addition of yourself and Colin Burns, you guys do have one of the most formidable attack units, in the country right now. Can you talk a little bit about what that's like been playing with Colter? Was he helpful in terms of just from like a leadership perspective or a skill perspective? Just what's it like to be playing with him and doing those types of things?
He's a great player on the field and an even better guy off the field. The first moment that me and Colin stepped on campus, he actually came back to school early, took us in, and had us stay at his house here in Princeton, that all the juniors and seniors were staying at. Took us out to the field to go shoot. Him and the other seniors were just so welcoming to our class and me and Colin in general. And then I'd say over the past year or two, Colter being captain, his leadership has even stepped up even more. And he just knowing that, when he's out there, he's drawing so much attention from defenders and the other team. And it really feels like it makes me and Colin's job easier out there. It feels like, when he's drawing that attention, I can kind of slip behind sometimes and get a quick one. But I'd say overall, Colter has just been a great guy on and off the field, and definitely going to be sad next year when he's gone.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, I can think of, especially my sophomore year too, like just having some older guys like Christian Walsh and Jordan Wolf, when you have that connection of the line mates. I also think sometimes, like, for whatever it is, like 2 years older is like, it's a cool relationship, that sophomore, senior, or when you're freshmen, they're juniors, they're returning upperclassmen, but they're not like seniors looking at you yet like you're a freshman, so I always feel like there's some cool bonds there. One I wanted to touch on, and again, like when Stephen's kind of speaking about your attack, you have a lot of different talented midfielders. You've got Tucker up there. You've got, different guys. You got PD Bonanno coming in, initiating in a lot of different spots. You got Palumbo. How do you balance, when it's your time to dodge versus when to swing it and move it? I think that's something that a lot of offensive players struggle with, when to initiate and be aggressive versus when to swing it backside, or, when to give another guy a run. How do you think about that?
Yeah, I think it definitely varies. Like it a lot throughout the game. Like it can be super complicated, like exactly when you should do something. But I think breaking it down to like just knowing when we break it down, it's more of like, we'll initiate in a 2-man game. And then out of that 2-man game, we'll swing it to the backside, and just understanding like spacing is super crucial too. But overall, I think that it really just comes down to just having like watching a lot of film and having a higher lacrosse IQ. For me, a lot of times if I'm playing X for Princeton, one of my main responsibilities would be to move the ball to the backside versus just taking a dodge back there. And I think flipping the field like that and moving the ball can be super effective and really lead to a better dodge on the backside.
Yeah, that's awesome. You had a really nice one against UNC where you kind of caught it ball side, kind of swung it from your knees to the backside, set up like a nice backside dodge. So, it kind of plays into the stick work component that you were saying with the wall ball, and something that we're going to touch on later in the pod. So it's cool to hear your perspective on that.
I got one final question for you, Nate, and I'm just, listening to you talk, and I'm trying to word this right. You use the word fun so frequently, and it's just something that like I can tell is important to you, and it makes a lot of sense. And I think a lot of players have those things, their way of, navigating. College lacrosse is hard. The pressure is hard. You're playing on a big stage. You're working a lot. So how do you navigate that? And I kept hearing you say the word fun, almost like emulating your passion behind it as a little kid in the backyard. Hitting the wall was therapeutic. You watch other highlight tapes because you enjoy it. Now, fun is not frivolous, right? Like you're still a serious player. You're still a competitor. You work hard. How do you kind of balance that? Like, how do you use fun and keeping it light while also having that competitive edge that you need to, win, to start as a freshman at Princeton, to be an impact player, to have the season you guys are having now?
Yeah, I definitely think fun in my way can also be working hard and being disciplined. Like fun for me is staying after practice and getting extras with my teammates and going to hit the wall on my own time or getting treatment or just being obsessed with the game pretty much. And I think at this high of a level in college lacrosse, like you really do need to be obsessed with the game. I think as a Princeton as an offense, we're trying to be even more obsessed with our efficiency, our offensive efficiency. And at some points, like that isn't going to be fun. Like there are going to be moments when you have a bad game and you have to respond, and that's not fun, but it's fun when you get the job done and you respond in the right way.
It makes a lot of sense. I can relate to that. I think a lot of us on the call can hear, and I think people listening that, if you can only willpower yourself so far at this level, there's got to be some internal drive. And I always think back to like, I loved shooting hoops as a kid. It was fun. It was therapeutic for me. So I liked basketball and could get better at it to a degree. And I hear you talking about the wall, like that doesn't feel like extra work to you, even though to some people it might. So I think just, it's no wonder why, you've continued to develop. I remember seeing you in high school, but like when you love the process, like you do, it's not always fun, but it's rewarding and something you look forward to and dream about and think about to continue to work on those things.
Exactly.
Well, Nate, it was awesome having you on, man. We appreciate the time. We know you're a hardworking student athlete and you got busy weeks, but it was awesome hearing your perspective. We're wishing you the best versus Penn and Yale to close out the regular season, and excited to keep watching you and your teammates on the field. You guys are fun to watch, and definitely pulling for you.
Well, I really appreciate it a lot, guys.
Deemer, this conversation with Nate just reminds me of a best in class experience where I believe it was going to Nate's junior year. He was coming to best in class in the summer and he got injured, so he couldn't play. But he still chose to attend the event. I remember seeing him there, at the event, watching the drills on the sideline, in a t-shirt, because he wanted to be there, because he wanted to watch the drills. And he said he wanted to learn from just watching and spectating even when he couldn't play. And that, that's one thing, talking to him on here, just kind of just him talking about how he loves the game reminded me of that experience. Do you remember that?
Yeah, it's something that you can't over engineer. And I think it speaks to Nate. I think it speaks to, how he was raised, with his parents. I don't really know his parents, but I've gotten to know him well. And again, I think it comes from a place of that humility, and that obsession with the game. And I remember that year because that was our first event, I believe, like our first best in class event. And there was probably 30 to 40 kids that got hurt or banged up or pulled out of the event, the week of. And, he was the one guy of all those guys that showed up even for that first day with a bum ankle, to do everything that you just said. And I just remember it making a real impression on me, being like, this guy's got something, he's got some of that intangible, mold, characteristic to him that besides being a great player, I had a lot of respect for that. And I just think it's another great example and learning lesson. So it's cool that you brought that up.
Stephen, him talking about, well, one, he kind of gave you a subtle shout out there. Watch the Stephen Rehfuss highlight tape growing up. But, hearing him talk reminded me of like listening to you talk about going into the backyard, shooting. I feel like you were a guy that was always watching other players too. I thought that was cool to hear him even just mention like you, because it seems like there's, a common theme of like just that obsession with the game, loving to watch other people, having fun trying to emulate them.
I got the chance to meet him at Best in Classes last summer. He was working it. He's like a total lax rat. Like he's, well ingrained in the game. He's watched a ton of guys. I loved actually how he talked about on game day, how he'll watch, lacrosse that day of like a game or a player. I did used to do that as well all the way through college, watching different highlight tapes. Matt Danowski's Duke highlight tape was usually my go-to. I think for young players, like for me and I used to just get pretty stressed out like before games, like not like nervous, but more so just like a lot of the built up energy. And I think with what he was saying of just like having fun, I think it just is, a helpful tip to just kind of ground yourself and remember like, oh yeah, I've spent my entire life dreaming of getting to this point and being in these types of games. And like, let me go back to, even if it's just for like a minute this morning, let me go back to what it was like when I was, 8 years old watching ESPN and watching some of these games. So that's what I found really helpful. But yeah, Nate's, he's a great kid. He's also close to hitting 100 points. He could hit it this weekend on his career at Princeton. Talk about a school that has phenomenal attackmen in their history, and he's, going to be the next one if he's not already the next one. So, he's a great player, really, really nice kid too.
Yeah, it's a form of that visualization we've talked about, on the podcast before too, whether it's yourself or whether it's just watching other guys playing loose and making plays. It's a cool part of his routine, that honestly, I wish I did more of that. That probably would have helped me too, like settle in and settle some nerves as well. So another nice tidbit there.
It's interesting for me hearing that because as a defense, I think it's more of a positional thing, honestly, maybe a little bit of a personality thing, but I wouldn't watch highlight tapes of other defenders, but I would watch if the player I was guarding had a highlight tape, I'd watch it that morning. I did this a ton in the pros because like when I got into the MLL my rookie year, I hadn't seen some of those guys play for a while. So I would just watch their highlight tapes and no extra pressure on it. Like I didn't have to like memorize anything or take notes, but it was just a nice, thing. I think we talk a little bit about like Nate talks about having fun, like, and we mentioned, obviously there's work that goes into prepare, but if during the game you're so stressed out and so in your head about it, all that work you did to prepare is not going to translate. So just getting back into that, you've done the work, get into like your flow state a little bit, get into what relaxes you, what makes you love the game and allows you to access all that work you've done.
Yeah. And I think it's also such a benefit to, we talked a little bit about how the social media stuff, it has a lot of pressure on it and whatnot, but like flip the script to the other side. It's like you have access now to all this different film. Any kid can go on YouTube right now and say you missed the Duke UNC game. Well, you can basically watch the whole game in 20 minutes that someone condensed for you. Every kid now in high school and college basically has a highlight tape of some sort. So, with all the student athletes that I'll talk to, I'll be like, you should be on YouTube looking and watching these different players, seeing what they're doing, seeing what's happening in these different games. So it's the plus to, the social media age that we do live in now.
Wrapping up that great players perspective with Nate Kabiri, we are now moving on to GPUs, which are our games, players, and units. Deemer is going to kick us off with his GPUs.
For my game, I actually have two. I just want to give a shout out to Virginia Tech and Pitt for ACC upsets and wins. I think these are both, big wins for each program and ones we just haven't seen often. So definitely shout out to those two teams. For my player, I was super impressed with Matt Traynor. 7 goals out of the 10 for Penn State. That's 70% of the production. Shoots every type of shot. He scored a few low to high, couple low to low, couple S dodges underneath. He's a legit offensive threat, and he had a huge performance in a Big Ten win. My unit, Michigan women's down defense, held Hopkins 0 for 6 in their big home win over top 5 Hopkins. Huge performance by the women down unit, and overall in the day defensively only giving up 2 goals to a high-powered attack. So shout out to the woman down defense of the Wolverines.
Matt Traynor, I actually just looked up, obviously he's at Penn State, but looked up where he's from. He's from Pennsylvania, played at Malvern Prep. I do think players like him, are just really interesting. I feel like he has some of that Canadian flair, like box background type style to the way that he plays. So I do just find it interesting, when guys are able to pull off a lot of the goals that he is able to, that aren't Canadian. I think you see it a little bit more now, but really impressive stuff from him. And, commented on him earlier, when he's healthy, he's really good. And then, Michigan women to be able to hold, Hopkins, for anyone that's not paying attention to the women's game as much, Hopkins has been on a tear this year. I think they're ranked top 5 heading into that game. So that's a huge win for Michigan. And, we've talked about the Big Ten men a lot and just how that conference looks, now the Big Ten women, Michigan, I think they had dropped a little bit in the top 20. But, after that win, they're right back in it. And, a lot of big games coming up on the women's side. For my GPUs, so my game of the week is Yale 21, Dartmouth 12. I know that's not a close game by any means, but Yale clinched the Ivy League tournament berth. And I just wanted to kind of shed some light on them because my players, so for players, I'll go next, Leo Johnson and Chris Lyons. So Leo Johnson was 4-4 versus Dartmouth. Chris Lyons had 6 goals. These two players are both taking their grad year at Maryland next year. But, so far this year, Yale has been underperforming for what people maybe thought heading into the season. They started off the year, I believe it was 1-5. But they have won their last 3 games against Brown, Penn, and Dartmouth to secure that spot. And, I just think, and we were talking a little bit about it with, Kabiri before he came on, just the Ivy League always gets really testy at this point in the year. And the Ivy League tournament is always extremely competitive. Anyone can win it. So Yale's a team that I just wouldn't really count out just yet. And I could see them making some sort of a run, spoiling maybe some bids for teams come NCAA tournament time. Unit, staying within the Ivy League here. We've shouted them out almost every week that we've had this podcast, but the Cornell offense as a unit, they are leading the country in assists per game. Watching them play live this past weekend, I went to the Cornell Syracuse game on Long Island. The way that Cornell moves the ball really is second to none. And they just do it in such like an unselfish, but also disciplined way. I think, Busick has done such a great job of letting his players play, like finding that balance of letting them play, but also being strict of like, these are the right plays and these are the plays that you need to make. CJ Kirst, obviously the front runner for the Torton and deserves every single bit of attention. And I almost feel like he's even like underrated to an extent. Like he is an absolute beast, and seeing him in person, like the Kirst brothers are big dudes. So he was really impressive. And then Ryan Goldstein, he's leading that team in assists per game, assists on the season with 33. And then Michael Long, like he's a guy who I don't even know if you would consider him their third attackman, maybe from a points perspective you would, but like he's a talented guy. So just wanted to shout them out. They're at 10.55 assists per game. The next closest team after them is Syracuse, who's at 8.92. So there is a pretty big gap because once you start getting into like 2, 3, 4, those numbers are pretty tight. So speaks volumes. They're clearly the number one team in the nation and the best offense in the country right now.
I mean, that offense, what I just keep thinking of is 2022, them playing Maryland in the championship. And that was Brett Maycar on CJ Kirst, and that was Ajax Apatello on Michael Long. And the fact that those guys are still there in addition to everybody else they have. And like, you look at Brett and Ajax, those are like two PLL defenders, and those guys were tough matchups. At that point, it was Brett's, senior year, and CJ Kirst still was kind of not quite, everybody knew he's good, but he wasn't quite like on the map like he is now. Now he's like, the obvious number one draft, Wharton, all this, rightfully so. I remember watching those guys in that game, and I was like, those are tough matchups. Now you have those guys back. You're saying Michael Long's potentially the third attackman on that line, which is crazy. And then you look at how bought in they seem that as a unit to like what Busick and defensively, Coach Stevens and all of those guys. No, I agree not to overhype them, but there's a reason we're talking about them again. And from a stat standpoint that they're so effective. And to your point about Kirst being underrated, like he's not just a Dodger. He can score a lot of points off the ball. He's a really tough matchup. He's smart, and he seems to know that like when to be selfish and when not to be, which is a really hard, I'm sure you guys can relate as offensive players, is a really hard skill to cultivate.
Yeah, completely. And I think that's like the best way to put it. Like he is an absolute superstar, but he doesn't have to like hold on to the ball or make, crazy plays, at least from what I've seen. Another play that really stands out, he like took one on the left side. He went underneath and took like kind of a lefty low angle shot. It got saved. And he just continued his momentum. His Cornell teammate picked it up, and then he's flashing around the crease just with his right hand, catches the ball and finishes. So he gets like 2 shots off within like 5 seconds of each other, but he just continues to play, and he can score lefty and righty. So just a tremendous talent. And then talking about 2022, Matt, like he had 55 goals that year as a freshman in college. Like as, probably the number one option. Piatelli was also a top option there. But he's a guy that, he's just dominated year in and year out. And I believe he is maybe 5 goals away from breaking Peyton Cormier's record. And that'll be a true 4 seasons that he breaks it in. So he only played 22, 23, 24, and then 25. So no COVID year, no extra games for him.
We're going to have to pull up that Piatelli set play that they ran in that game. That was a good one. I don't know if you guys remember that, but there was some nice set pieces both ways in that game.
That game just looked hot. I remember watching the end of that game. Everybody just looked tired. All right, moving on here. I got my GPUs. My game going a little bit of a different direction here. We have the Army-Navy game. Army wins 12-11 in overtime. Was catching up on some of that this morning, watching through it. And man, did it just look like an Army-Navy game. And if you were to just look before the game, Army's, having a better season. They have a ton of talent. Navy's been solid, but you want to compare the seasons equally as the roster and how they've been doing. And of course, people that know, like I believe Adam Lamberti wrote in his On the Run newsletter today that 4 of the last 10 Army-Navy games have been overtime games. 4-4 at halftime. Army is up 8-6 in the third. Navy scores 5 goals in the fourth quarter, is able to tie it up 11-11. And then Army, Jackson Lakers scores in overtime to win. A couple of things that stood out. One, like just the defensive clips in this game and like the plays in the middle of the field. If you watch it, the effort and compete level is just off the charts. Guys selling out entirely the whole game. And the energy and effort in this game is really just exceptional to watch. It felt like it could have taken place at a grass field behind a high school like 30 years ago, and just teams giving it everything they had, like the greatest high school game of all time. And you look at some interesting stats, like we talked about goalie play, Dan Daly for Navy saves the ball at 56%. Sean Byrne only saved it at 35%. And he's a guy Sean Byrne for majority of the season was saving at over 70%. And so kind of looking at some of the stats we talked about last week as something that, allows a team like Navy that might not be as strong on paper as Army is they were able to score, throughout the game when they got opportunities, and Army struggled a little bit early on. Now for player here, kind of building off it, just as I was looking at this game, AJ Marsh for Navy is a guy that we know. He played at McDonough. I've coached against him. I've worked with him. He is just like all over the place and an impact player on the field. Coach Amplo had a quote afterwards that was, AJ Marsh was an absolute killer out there, took over the game, dominated the field. AJ has 9 points this season. He had a goal in the game. He typically covers top matchups. He gets ground balls. They use him in many different ways. So just wanted to give him a shout out there as a guy that is he's a stud. And maybe everybody doesn't get to see him play as much as they would if he was, on a Big Ten, ACC, or Ivy League team. Another quick shout out, Mason Cook for player, 5-5 freshman at Loyola against Holy Cross. I coached Mason in high school, so saw that, had to give him a shout out for 10 points. My unit is Maryland's defense. They're second in the country in goals allowed, 7.64 per game. They're clearing at 91%, which is fourth in the country. Logan McNaney just set the all-time record for saves at Maryland at 706. That record's been around for 41 years or so. And that's pretty crazy when you know about the goalies that have gone through there, the Nico Amatos, the Kyle Bernlers, and Brian Dock. Like, there's plenty of guys that have gone, Brian Phipps, that have gone through there, and Logan is now the all-time save leader. Maryland's defense, like, they're like 50 something in the country in calls, turnovers, but they're effective and do their job, and they make it really hard to score against them. They play complementary lacrosse and they clear the ball well. And so against a hot Ohio State team that had just won 11 in a row, they're able to really limit that offense to 8 goals and just make it challenging to score. So just a unit that I've been consistently impressed with. And it was a group that really didn't have any preseason All-Americans going into the year. And I think you've seen like Will Schaller, McDonald, AJ Larkin really just emerge as top players.
Did either one of you ever play Army in college?
No, we would play Navy every year.
So we used to play Army every single year, and this might not come as a surprise, but they are the most grueling team to play against. When I say that, one, those guys are absolutely massive, and two, like, they just do not stop. Regardless, they are like, I mean, they're the Army, so it's a great thing for us, right? But if there's like a team that you could turn to of like their energy that they come out with, to then their energy that it looks like in the second quarter, the third quarter, the fourth quarter, like, it is always, like, top notch. There's no quit. They are extremely disciplined and just like absolute grinders. So I just wanted to check to see if you guys had played them, because they're always, a really difficult matchup. And I think they're going to get into the tournament this year, and they're going to be a tough win for anyone.
It's cool thinking too about, who runs that program. And, Coach A has just done amazing things there. And it's kind of cool too, because I feel like there's been, over the last couple of years, whether it's from his Army camp or interviews, there's a lot of sound bites of his that kind of go viral because of the messages that he preaches to the team. He's one of the most competitive guys. I think someone might have to correct me, but I think he was one of the guys that for a while was carrying the torch on the coaches recruiting circuit of organizing pickup hoops with a lot of the coaches. So I think he's
that sounds right. Yeah.
He's one for, just always promoting competition, right? And loving to compete. But he's also one of the most genuine and compassionate guys that you'll meet. So I'm really happy for him, for, again, the success they've had, this season, but also just what he's, done with the program in general. So, it's definitely cool to see. I think it just speaks to the culture that he's created there at the academy.
Yeah. To that point, I coach Deemer. We were in Florida for the IMLCA convention, and we both presented there and went and watched some other presentations and some of lacrosse, but we got to go to Coach Pressler's Hall of Fame induction that evening, and Coach Alberici was there because he's really close with Coach Pressler and worked with him at Duke. And I got to sit with him, and I never really spent time with him before. I thought, to your point, the head coach Army, he's been there since maybe 05 or 06 and really built that program. Thought he was going to be this very, kind of tough guy, all over, maybe hard to relate to and have a conversation with. The nicest, easiest to talk to, most like genuine, comparing, compassionate, like thoughtful guy. And you can tell he has that edge about him from a coaching standpoint. But we're sitting there, I'm asking him how Keegan Tracy's doing. Keegan played at St. Paul's. He's at Army now. We both know Keegan. He came to a lot of our stuff. And he's like speaking so highly. Text Keegan like a selfie of us. And Keegan responds like within like 2 minutes, like just this like mess. You can just tell how the guys relate to him and respond to him. Like that's the head coach at Army texting their kid, one of their players on Saturday night, easy for Keegan not to reply to that. But to me, like something like that just shows the relationship that he has with those guys, how they view him and the product that they've put on the field over the last, I'd say 5 to 6 years, really, in particular, has shown the work he's put into that program. All right, next up here, let's get into the breakdown. Today, we were discussing passing accuracy, and to take it a little further, we were talking about how a feeder can take accountability, for beyond just getting the ball to their teammate, but actually delivering that ball in a way that sets their teammate up for success. Stephen and Deemer, you guys are both offensive players. Deemer, maybe start with you because I do think you had great teammates like this at Duke, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts, as a shooter, as an offensive player, beyond just like receiving a pass, how much does it matter how a feeder can set you up and deliver the ball to you in a way that allows you to, maybe take a shot that's a higher quality shot for you than you having to reach for a reset and things like that?
Yeah, this is a fun one to talk about. Anyone that's played for Coach Danowski can, speak to his some of the mantras and some of the, just the things that, he would kind of talk about that really come back to making the game really simple. And one of the ones that we would say a lot offensively, and Coach Caputo would echo a lot, was passer makes the shooter. And that, I think, again, it's simple, but it's just a constant reminder that the passer is the one that sets up the shooter. And being able to put the ball in a spot that allows a shooter to catch it loaded or catch it where they're asking for it, I think is the next level to just, recognizing that someone's open. How do you throw a catchable ball? How do you put touch on it or enough loft on it for the certain situations and allow a shooter to catch, receive, and put their weight behind the shot? I think that's something that's incredibly, I wouldn't even say, under-taught, because I think it's hard to teach, honestly. Like, it's not something you can just go out and like just always rep it. Like, it just takes a lot of emphasis and focus. And some players are just a lot better at it than others in terms of delivering catchable balls that set teammates up for success.
Yeah. I mean, I have a lot of thoughts on this topic and I'm trying to just like condense them into, a few. I think in terms of your last point, like it's hard to teach. I think one, like from a feeding perspective, you have to have someone that can see what's going on, have to have someone that can get their hands free. Like you definitely have to have high IQ. But I think from like a teaching perspective, one thing that's been really helpful is just limiting the amount of whip that is in a player's stick. I think so many kids right now, like they just want whip in their stick so they can shoot an extra 10 miles an hour and maybe score. And, one thing that I always say to people, like even in shooting drills at practice, it's like, all right, well, like your pass really does matter because guess what? You're about to be up in the shooting line and someone's going to be passing to you. And if someone's throwing the ball at your ankles, then you don't get to get your shot off. So like, kind of treat others like you want to be treated, throw a good pass so that then someone throws a good pass to you. And then also from, having whip in your stick perspective, like if you can't throw a good pass, then don't expect someone to be able to throw you a good pass. Like it's not all about just you being a shooter, right? This is lacrosse. You have to have the ball in your stick. Maybe you get 5 shots off in a game. That's a lot, especially as you get older. So when that ball is in your stick, you got to be able to do other things. So I think from a teaching perspective, that aspect of it is huge. And then I just think, so much goes into passing between like accuracy, but also timing, right? Like you have to know timing of slides. You have to know timing of when someone's cutting. And I think if you can't be accurate, you're really not going to set up your shooter for any success. Like if someone's cutting and even if it just takes them, half a second to locate the ball elsewhere, well, then by the time they bring it back to where they can shoot it from, a defender's already on them. Like as players get older and get into college and then, even the PLL, like guys like Matt Dunn off ball that are then going to be sliding to you and checking you, like people move that much faster that you have to be able to deliver the ball on target and be super accurate and be on time in order for that person to even get a shot off. So I just think it's, a major concept. I think you're right, Deemer, in that people don't talk about it like a ton. And maybe that's why we're talking about it right now, but it is just like, incredibly important.
Yeah, I do think it's one of those things where it makes a big difference, but it's pretty nuanced, and you don't always recognize that is the thing that a player does really well. So like, unless you're really looking to the next level, you might be like, yeah, I can throw that same pass and I can do this, but like that player, for whatever reason, gets a lot of assists because he or she delivers the ball to a player in a way they want to score. I actually saw this cool video on Instagram or TikTok, and it was Jason Williams, one of the greatest passers of all time in basketball, talking in this clip about knowing it's his responsibility as the point guard to know how different players on his teams like to shoot. So that he talked about how JJ Redick likes to shoot and how much more quickly he can get a shot off from here versus like a certain spot. And it's his job to deliver the ball to that spot, because you see JJ Redick coming off the screen in the NBA is like, he doesn't have time to catch it, move, and reset his feet. It's like one fluid motion. And so I do think there's an element, and you guys talking about it, like if I'm rotating into a man down or a slide recovery and a player has to reach for a ball and re-square and re-flip his hips to get the shot off, well, I'm probably in the glove spot then or through the lane. If a player, if Matt O'Keefe catches the ball in his spot, with his, left hand and right shoulder to the goal, he's going to get that off before I can get there. And at higher levels, the timing like that makes a huge difference.
I think it also really just connects on, the chemistry between players, just again, guys being able to have enough trust to throw players passes. And then when you have some players, like I do think of Matt O'Keefe as a guy that can handle passes in a lot of different ways. Like he can catch a handcuff, he can catch it high, he can catch it at his ankles and make plays out of it. It just builds that back and forth. What I think is interesting though, in terms of the stick work piece is, it would be interesting to look in like the arc and progression of different areas and different play styles, in terms of what people are valuing in terms of dodging, what types of dodging, how quickly you're getting the ball in and out of your stick. Because based on the offense you're in and the role that you're in, I do think that creates different demands on your pocket setup. And I remember when I was progressing through my time at Duke, I was spending more time on the perimeter. I was spending more time in like that pairs offense, and that allowed me to get more aggressive with my pocket to more of like a mid-high, little more whippy, that I could really step in between 13 and 16 and really be consistent with my shooting. But what would take some sacrifice would be some forward passes to X. And so it was always this trade-off. And then it got really bad my first or second year pro. And I was losing confidence because the ball wasn't snapping out of my stick when slides came as much as I needed it to. So then I kind of altered my setup with Greg at East Coast Eyes. And so I just think that's like an interesting part of it too, is, trying to understand that as well, but then also putting in the time to find your feel of your pocket to do what you need to do in your given roles.
Yeah, I think that's a perfect point. And I think there's, major give and take with it. So I agree. I also think like you have to know yourself as a player, right? Okay, you're getting more whip in your stick at Duke as an All-American midfielder, and you're producing, like you're actually, it is contributing to you scoring more and more goals, right? And you can point to that. We've highlighted, different games. You had 7 goals versus Syracuse. I think you're like the first Duke midfielder to have over 50 goals. So it's like that makes sense for you to do. But if you're, maybe a second line midi or the third midfielder on a first line that's stuck at like 5 or 8 goals on the season, well, maybe you should figure out, okay, well, I'm not just like a pure goal scorer for us. I'm not helping us out this much. So what are other ways that I can impact? Or, I usually find it a lot with guys that are on the bench, like third or fourth line guys that they've got a lot of whip in their stick so they can shoot really hard. But it's like, hey man, but you cannot run the offense when you get out there. Like this stick is just not good for you. But then, your other piece to it, it's like, well, then make sure you spend the time, like, okay, you're going to get some more whip in your stick. Well, make sure you spend that extra time than being able to throw those good passes, like being able to find what that feel is for you, because it is so important. So I completely agree. I just think it does take some honest, self-reflection, looking at yourself in the mirror, like, okay, what kind of player am I? Am I this like all-American shooter, or am I just someone that's like trying to get myself on the field? And usually there's a difference there. One last point I did want to bring up, just because you brought up Coach Danowski. There's this video back in, I believe, 2012. Was that your freshman year, Deemer? Or
13 spring, 12 fall.
Spring. Okay, so it's a year before you got there. They did Inside Lacrosse did this whole series for Duke versus UVA, like having like the
big series.
Yeah, it was awesome. And they show like Danowski in the film room, meeting with some of his guys, and they're watching Virginia play. And that's when Steele Stanwick was on UVA. And this is the first time it really stood out to me, like what it means, like Steele Stanwick was my favorite player, and he's like a phenomenal feeder, but it's like, okay, what makes him so good? And then you watch Danowski in the film room. He's like, yeah, you watch Steele Stanwick. He's basically has his feet at the end line at X, and he's throwing passes to guys at the top of the box, right on the ear, lefty and righty. And I was like, whoa, that's like incredible to think about. You see it on TV, but then I think like, whoa, if I go to X right now, could I actually throw a pass on someone's ear that's at the top of the box? Like, probably not. That's a pretty far distance, right? And then he talks about him just being able to drive up the left side, can feed, drive up the right side, can feed. So I do think that was the first time when, I've kind of, I guess maybe always thought of it or watched Steele Stanwick a lot, but then it's hearing like a coach talk through why that's so successful. I think that's a video worth checking out if people haven't seen it yet.
Not only could Steele do that, he could do it, as you mentioned, with both hands, with his feet moving while being deceptive. So I just don't think, if you watch it, it's like, wow, this guy's just throwing passes, but like he's throwing the right passes in the right spot while creating those passing lanes by moving and drifting the defense to different spots. And this isn't a topic for now, because I think it's too deep of a rabbit hole to go down. But I just think if you don't have appropriate throwing form, you'll never be able to do those things. You can't be deceptive. If you can't snap it, and you don't have a soft top hand and can't get your bottom hand to the spot you need to and your shoulder around, you will never be able to snap it that distance accurately, consistently with your feet moving. And I do think, especially for long balls, I see it all the time, once again, for a separate conversation, but people compensate with their stick because their throwing form isn't where they need it to be. It's like hitting with golf clubs that, probably aren't the right size for you. You start making all these adjustments, but really, if you just had the right weapon and learned how to use it appropriately, that's how a lot of those guys can do it. So I do think that's an area where, if you're a young player and a coach is giving you feedback on like how to catch softly or where to get your hands and how to loosen up your grip and your throwing, like that is what allows you to do the things a guy like Steele Stanwick could, or else your ceiling is just not going to be that high.
My favorite analogy with from a feeding perspective is to think about when you're holding your stick in your fingertips, you're not gripping the stick like a hammer. When you grab a hammer, you've got the stick between like the pads of your fingers at the base of your fingers and like the joint of like leading into your thumb. When you lay the hammer like flat across the bed of your hand and you grip it, that's a hammer grip. When you lay the stick across the beds of your fingers and you grip around that way, that's having the stick in your fingertips. And when you have both hands like that, and then you preach that and you stay with that, that's how someone's going to learn to throw and snap the correct way from a young age. And that's what allows you to then start just pushing your hands back to a comfortable space versus being in front and then just like pushing, So that's something I think for any, maybe more beginner or younger coaches or parents listening, if you're looking at your kid 5 or 6 years old in the yard, like make sure they're gripping it with their fingertips and learning to do that and getting them a small enough stick that they can do that as well, versus something like we talked about on the podcast with McKenna last week, max length and stuff that you're not actually even able to get that snap.
I've told this a few times, but like it's one of my favorite stories of like my first time at Maryland before we even started practice. We're throwing on the field and Coach Tills comes out and he starts showing me how to catch and throw. And I'm just sitting here. I'm like, in my head, I was so embarrassed. I'm like, I'm at Maryland. I just, was a senior captain at a good high school. We played in the championship and like all these things now that I'm like, I'm such a fool for thinking that. And they still do that. They spend all fall teaching their freshmen how to catch and throw. So when you watch Maryland move the ball like they do and the consistency of passes, they're not snatching at a lot of stuff. That is like a fundamental thing that they teach. Like he's looking at your thumb on the stick, where your bottom hand is, where you're stepping, like all of those things, and you get held accountable to that. But that's what allows consistency and accurate passing. And if you were like, I would have been an okay player either way, probably, but I would have thrown some more passes away. No doubt. I would have dropped a few more balls. And that's like, that compounds across your team and over the years. And so that was so eye-opening for me. And now I sit here and I'm just like, it's a really hard thing to teach and get kids to buy into, but it makes a huge difference.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. And I mean, if Maryland's doing it and if Tillman is doing it, then I think people should take notes.
All right, well, we'll wrap up the breakdown there. Stephen, why don't you kick us off with looking ahead here at some games this upcoming weekend?
We've continued to highlight how competitive the Big Ten is. Have a little bit of rivalry weekend coming up with it. So on Friday night, we'll get two games. The first game is going to be at 6:00 on the Big Ten Network. Rutgers is at Penn State, followed by at 8 p.m. Hopkins at Maryland. A couple of big games there. See how the Big Ten seedings really shake out. And then on Saturday at 4 p.m., also on the Big Ten Network, so we get a lot of TV games. We'll have Ohio State at Michigan. That's a big game. Ohio State coming off the loss, Michigan coming off of the Rutgers win. Ivy League game that does stand out, Cornell at Harvard. Cornell, number one team in the country right now. Harvard has just, continued to impress, and, they're a top 10 team. We've highlighted Sam Kane a lot. Sam Kane versus CJ Kurse, two of the best attackmen in the Ivy League, but also in the country. So looking forward to that one. And then from the ACC perspective, Saturday at noon on ESPNU, we've got Notre Dame at UNC. Notre Dame had a big win last weekend against Virginia. They took care of business at home. Now they go on the road to a really, talented UNC team that has found different ways to win. They're able to beat last week Duke by 1 goal. So that was a big game. And then finishing it up from the ACC, Syracuse is at Duke. That's 2 p.m. on the ACC network. So like I said, out of all these games, the only one that's not on linear television would be that Cornell Harvard one. But Syracuse at Duke. Duke right now, I believe, is sitting at 0-2 in ACC play. Syracuse is 2-0 in ACC play. Impressed by Duke's fight last week. 8-1 or 8-7, I believe, was the score of that UNC game. Syracuse coming off the loss to Cornell. So I expect this to be a good game. It's never easy for any team going down to Duke and playing them there. And I think Duke just has continued to get better throughout the season. But I think they'll need to score, obviously some more goals, only held to 7 last week. But that's a big game, and we'll see how the ACC tournament shakes out, because I believe so right now Duke is 0-2 in ACC play, and Virginia is 0-2 in ACC play as well. They have not played one another yet. But that will be, a big game, and we'll see kind of who gets that 4th spot come ACC tournament time. So like I said, I know it's a lot of games. Are there any games that you guys are seeing here that really stand out?
I'm excited for Cornell Harvard. I think, that's another one where, I think I saw Harvard clinch the Ivy tournament, and I think that's just another big matchup that's been brewing this season. So it's going to be fun to see Sam King and CJ Kurse squaring off. But another guy, even for Harvard, we talk about, again, completely on the same page with Long and Goldstein. And then you add to support Sam King on attack, you got Jack Spidell, who's really been coming on strong. And you've got Teddy Malone, for Harvard too. So that's going to be fun to watch. And then I think this is a great opportunity for UNC at home against Notre Dame. I think that's going to be a battle. We've talked about Duffy before and how he's been someone that's really hard to stop. So I'm curious to see how Sean Light is going to match up against him.
Yeah, I think all of the Big Ten games are interesting just because the Big Ten's interesting right now, and you don't really know what's going to happen. Notre Dame against UNC is one that I'm personally excited to see just because, of what you just mentioned, Deemer. I do think, like, not to make a game about a matchup, but I do think Owen Duffy is a very impressive Dodger and Sean Light's a great defender. So, personally, I love watching those. I do think Syracuse at Duke, though, I do think you two need to develop some type of friendly wager here because it's a big matchup. And two proud alums sitting here playing in a big game on Saturday on the ACC network. And I think there might need to be something at stake here. So I'll let you two figure that out.
I don't know. You put me on the spot.
Who's rocking the losing team's merch on the podcast?
Yeah, I think that's it. I think it's a t-shirt on the podcast.
I feel like Stephen will catch some tough heat for that. I don't think he would get on the podcast next week if he had to wear Duke merch.
Yeah, and it's not really fair because Deemer wears a Syracuse bomber jacket just like around New York regularly.
Yeah, I'm a Cuse fan because I live in Manhattan now.
True. Yeah, well, I'm definitely not wearing a Duke shirt or any Duke apparel.
Oh, someone's scared.
No, not scared. I will say we didn't talk about him, but Adam Lamberti wrote about him in his blog this week. Duke's Charlie Johnson holding Owen Duffy to just 2 points. He's a guy that's emerged. I've seen, you guys might know a little bit better, but I feel like I've seen, a lot on him as this season has progressed. He had 4 ground balls and 5 caused turnovers in that game as well. So he's a guy looking forward to. Deemer, we'll have to come up with a more creative wager for this game for Johnson.
Johnson's been awesome. He's it's obviously a bummer for their defense and for him that they just, again, couldn't get the win. But that performance definitely glossed over, obviously, because when you lose to Carolina, nothing else really matters. But he's, he looked great. I think as early as the Michigan game when Duke beat Michigan in OT, we had talked a little bit about him then, and he's just continued to blossom. So that's a defender that is going to be, a great asset to the Duke defense down the stretch.
Yeah, and I think there was a quote. Coach Caputo spoke about him, in a quoted interview after a game, just about, one, how great of a player he is, and two, just like how awesome of a person he is. And he's been a guy that when you watch that team, like, he's emerged as like a very solid cover guy for them. And I think that defense, to your point, has not been getting the love maybe they deserve just because they haven't won some of these closer games, but they've been doing a great job in everything I've seen of making it hard for some really talented offenses to score.
He was not even listed on first, second, third, or honorable mention midseason All-America list from Inside the Cross. I do feel like a performance like that has to put you in conversation for being an All-American. And I haven't watched him a ton outside of that, but with what you guys are saying, with what we've heard, and just the Owen Duffy matchup, that's a legit matchup.
Well, if we're making comparisons here, if Bobby Van Buren's performance against McCabe Millen earns him best defender in the country, where does Charlie Johnson's performance against Owen Duffy earn him?
I think some people might say an asterisk is that I think Duffy is a little beat up right now, injury wise, but his first goal of the game, he did not look injured by any means. So I need to watch more film on it, but I did read something about that. Don't know how true it is.
I will say, and you guys know this, this is the challenge of rating defenders, right? It comes down to, because it doesn't really matter, like, for a lot of these guys, how many ground balls or caused turnovers they have. Like, people, it's helpful, but that's not really like if Bobby Van Buren didn't have great stats for ground balls and caused turnovers, but he's covering the best Dodger every game and they can't score, he's going to be an All-American. Once you start getting your name gets momentum as a defender, you're always in the conversation until you really fall off. And so I think there's just this lagging effect for like a guy like Charlie Johnson, where now once he has 2 or 3 of those performances, people start talking about him, and then it's like, oh, Charlie Johnson, like, and deservingly so, but more so just saying and highlighting it, like it is challenging to appropriately rate defenders. Because some of the best ones, only their team knows they're great, and maybe the guy they go against until some time has passed.
Yeah, I think you're right. And not to go too deep on this topic, but I was actually talking to some of my friends about it this weekend. I was like, oh, Billy Juan last year is scoring like, 8 or 9 or 10 goals on the season. And everyone's like, Billy Juan's like a fantastic defenseman. And this year he's not scoring any goals. I think he might have 1 or 2 on the season. And I think his stock has dropped like nationally from a conversation perspective. Obviously, he's still really good. People think he's really good. He's an honorable mention on this list. But I just think it's interesting. I do think sometimes when defenders or LSM may be a little bit different, but like they start scoring goals, it's like, oh man, this guy's a phenomenal defender. So it's like, what are we evaluating them on?
It's just hard because, the best way to get points here is play a really tough slate and always cover the best guy and do a good job. But like Syracuse has Riley Figueroa. So Billy's role on that team is different. Billy is a really good defender. He's a really good off-ball defender. He's a really good on-ball defender, and he's really good off the ground. He also scores he also can score goals. And if he didn't, in my opinion, he would still be an All-American defender. I think the point is like it's hard unless you really are deep into it.
And then that was my point last year. I'm like, well, okay, Juan is phenomenal, but so is Figueroa. Like, and Figueroa is getting sometimes the number 1 matchup just because he's not scoring goals. He's still an All-American defender.
Sounds like we should make an FCL All-American list and form team with the top 11 guys to piece all together for a future pod.
Okay.
Future pod, the top cover defender, the top number 2, the number 3, and we piece all the pieces together.
I'm gonna need some time. We'll do it before.
That'll be tough, but that's a good idea.
Take a lacrosse perspective on an All-American list versus just taking all the top Dodgers, all the top cover guys, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So,
or just having an All-American list that it's just the exact number and doesn't give like.
That would be a start.
Just like 4 attack, 7 middies.
Well, you got to get rope unit in there.
Exactly.
So you get 3 attack, a goalie, 3 offensive middies, 3 defenders for 10, and then you get an LSM and a short stick D midi and a face-off guy for 13. Only 1 short stick D midi.
We will work on that. We'll project board that one out. But everyone, thanks for tuning in. Another great episode, guys. Awesome interview with Nate. Awesome players perspective. Awesome breakdown. Great previews and recaps of some games. Excited to keep this pod rolling. We're in mid-April. Thanks everyone for tuning in. Stay tuned, for more content on socials, more newsletters and weekly thoughts coming out. And guys, have a great rest of the week and weekend.
All right. See you guys.
See you guys.